Good morning. My name is Joe. My pronouns are he and him. 12 years, eh? It's a long time. Almost as long as it took me to finish reading this brick of a book. This is Infinite Jest. It is a work of speculative fiction by David Foster Wallace, published in 1996. And it's called one of the great American novels by people who know such things. It's a serious work of literature. It is most famous for being a difficult book to read. And this thing is heavy in all of the ways. It has, on this copy, it has 1,078 pages on Bible-thin paper in a small, dense font. Wallace uses a lot of big words and likes to casually slide in phrases in French or German or Latin, so you have to keep Googling definitions. At least I do. And there are hundreds of pages of endnotes, so like the last, I don't know, what is that, 10%, I guess, of the book is endnotes, and you have to keep flipping back and forth. You have to keep 2 bookmarks at a minimum so that you can flip back and forth to read the endnotes and then back to where you were in the story. I've seen copies with more bookmarks, ribbons, and tabs than Grandma's Bible. A lot of the endnotes are just kind of, they're informative, but kind of annoying, like a bunch of chemical explanations for psychedelic pharmaceuticals. Not essential to the story, but sometimes there are key plot points that happen in the endnotes, and they're hidden in there, so you have to do the work of going back to the end, or else you'll miss something important. And Wallace also plays fast and loose with the timeline. There's a bunch of flashbacks, there's shifting perspectives, there's occasional drug-induced hallucinations. Hundreds of characters, that's what this chart is all about, trying to track the various groups, stories that are being interwoven. Sometimes they overlap, but not always in obvious ways. You don't always know who is talking or at what point in their story they are coming from. To read Infinite Jest, you really have to pay attention. The main story is about a complicated family that runs an ultra-competitive private high school for junior tennis players in New England. They're trying to work out why the father in the family, why he committed suicide. So there's this family drama going on, and it's also, at the same time, with other characters, a story about substance addiction and recovery. We have teenagers and adults who are getting drawn into drug use. We have scenes of the wild streets of those who are addicted and those who supply their addictions, and the struggle for sobriety in recovery and support programs. And at the same time that that's happening, it's also a geopolitical spy story where a gang of French-Canadian terrorists called the Wheelchair Assassins are plotting to unleash a weapon called the Entertainment. Someone has created a film that is so engaging that if you start watching it, you literally can't tear yourself away. It's so good that you continue. Anyone who sees it keeps watching it on repeat until they die of natural causes. That is a bit ridiculous. But then again, David Foster Wallace was writing in 1996, and here in 2024, my Netflix account occasionally pauses to make sure that I'm still alive. Still with us? Are you going to pay next month's subscription fee? In the satire of Infinite Jest, the terrorist plan is to introduce this film into the mainstream culture so that society will literally entertain itself to death. And that is the main point of the book, as far as I can understand it. David Foster Wallace was pointing out that even in the 80s and 90s, our culture was so full of overconsumption, over-entertainment, that it was costing us. We were losing ourselves. From corporate sponsorship to politics to the career ladder, the American dream, everything is competing for our attention. And they're doing that by making things easier and easier to access, to get drawn into these things. This was before cell phones, before smartphones were a thing. Like, hey, look over here, you have to see this, it's so fun. Yeah, of course, we're just gonna keep clicking, continue watching. And contrast that, as an entertainment experience, Infinite Jest is the complete opposite of that. To read this is hard work. It doesn't hand you anything. It's vague and confusing. It's almost like the writer doesn't really care if you are following or not. It's kind of a literary joke that Infinite Jest is the book that is most often purchased but never read. And a lot of online reviews talk about how the reviewer started to read it and then put it down and then started again, and then after 2 or 3 times they finally made the effort to get through it. And that effort is the point. You have to pay attention. You have to immerse yourself in the world of the story. If you don't put in the work, if you don't zoom in, you won't get anything out of it. The value of the book comes almost entirely from the value that the reader puts into it. It's brilliantly written, but that does not matter a lick without the reader making the attempt to meet the writer in his intensity. You don't have to be brilliant to get there, but you do have to be intense and intentional about it. You have to want it to get it. The thing that you give your attention to is important, but it's the act of paying attention itself that gives it meaning. I'm not going to ask anyone to read this or recommend that anyone read this, but this is similar to what we're doing in the fall. In our worship services, we're going to be exploring some of the parables of Jesus. Fortunately, the parables aren't nearly as long or as dense or demanding as the infinite jest, but I think they work in much the same way. The stories matter. There's teaching there. There is wisdom. Jesus is trying to say something. And it's our engagement with the stories, the way that they draw us in and invite us to look more closely, the way that we find ourselves in them, the conversations they spark. That is also the wisdom. The medium is the message. Marshall McLuhan. Anyone else remember that Heritage Minute? Let's try it out. The medium is the message. In Matthew 13, Jesus is teaching outdoors, speaking to a large crowd gathered at a lake. And tellingly, Jesus is keeping his distance. He's in a boat, and they are on the shore. The teacher has wisdom that the people want to hear. He has a gift that he is freely offering to them, but he is out there, and they are in here on the shore. There's this significant gap in between them. And in that setting, as the gospel describes it, Jesus speaks to the crowd using parables. To back up for a minute, I think most of you will know this, but a parable is a churchy word for a fable or an allegory, a short story with a symbolic meaning. Literally, parable means to throw beside. It's a story that you throw out to go along with the point that you're trying to make. So the gospel writer is being clever here. Jesus is teaching in parables, he says. He's scattering stories as a farmer scatters seeds. And hey, would you look at that? The first parable just happens to be about a farmer scattering seeds, throwing it out there. As we just heard, the farmer doesn't seem to take great care with where the seeds end up. They are just casting them into the wind almost. Some seeds end up on the path where the birds come and eat them. Some seeds land among the rocks where they sprout quickly but then died because the soil was not deep enough for them to put down roots. Some seeds land in the weeds where the plants that grew were choked out by the competition. And some seeds land in good soil where they sprouted and grew and produced a solid, even spectacular harvest. Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear, Jesus said. Familiar stuff to most of us. At this point, the disciples in the boat, hearing this for the first time, they're wondering, what is Jesus up to? And so they pull him aside. Jesus' disciples came and said to him, "Why do you use parables when you speak to the crowds?" Jesus replied, "Because they haven't received the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but you have. For those who have will receive more, and they will have more than enough. But as for those who don't have, even the little they have will be taken away from them. This is why I speak to the crowds in parables. Although they see, they don't really see, and although they hear, they don't really hear or understand. What Isaiah prophesied has become completely true for them. You will hear, to be sure, but never understand, and you will certainly see, but never recognize what you are seeing. For this people's senses have become calloused, and they've become hard of hearing, and they've shut their eyes so that they won't see with their eyes or hear with their ears or understand with their minds and change their hearts and lives, that I may heal them. Blessed are your eyes because they see. Blessed are your ears because they hear. I assure you that many prophets and righteous people wanted to see what you see and hear what you hear, but they didn't." Got all that? That's an explanation without an answer. Let's go back, take it from the top. Why do you use parables? when you speak to the crowds?" Jesus replied, "Because they haven't received the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but you have." Jesus teaches in parables, he says, because some people get it and some people don't. Anyone seen this acronym floating around the internet? IYKYK? Anyone know what that means? Yeah. If you know, you know. And it comes with that smart meme that kind of suggests that you're a little bit better if you know than if you don't know. It signifies an inside joke, some reference that only some people will get. If you know, you know. And if you don't, well, sometimes that means that you are the joke, or at least you're on the outside looking in of whatever subculture lives in that corner of the internet. This is church for a lot of people. Typical religious teaching can be an insider's game sometimes. In here, we have a special language that we use. We have a set of symbols and rituals. We sing songs that you don't hear anywhere else. We have a particular way of doing things. And, well, if you know, you know. But if you don't, well, you might get some things wrong. You might make some incorrect assumptions. There might be some awkward mistakes. And this thing that is meant to connect us to God might actually get in the way for some people who aren't familiar with it. As Jesus says, "For those who have will receive more, and they will have more than enough. But for those who don't have, even the little they have will be taken away from them." This isn't about possessions. This is about knowledge. Insiders know more than outsiders. And, well, if you know, you know. But if you don't know, then it is hard to become an insider. Remember, the setting here is outdoors. Jesus has left the house. The gospel writer makes sure to include the detail. The house is a common metaphor for the insider religion of the day, the house of Israel, the house of God in the temple system. So Jesus has left the house. He's not part of the organized religion system anymore, and he's preaching to everyone out in the open, to the masses. His message is for all of them. And yet there is still this gap between Jesus and the crowd. He and his students, they're left the house, but there's still an insider game there. They're in the boat, and everyone else is still over here on the shore. How do we bridge that gap, Jesus is saying? He doesn't want to have insiders and outsiders. He left the house because he wants to be outside with everyone. His teaching in parables has something to do with bringing those groups together, narrowing that divide. There's something about parables that equalizes this, that overcomes the gap between insiders and outsiders, between the disciples in the know, in the boat, and the crowd on the shores that pretty obviously doesn't know. This is why I speak to the crowds in parables. Although they see, they don't really see, and although they hear, they don't really hear or understand. Now, I was raised in the church. I was raised as a religious insider, and we very much looked down our noses at the unsaved folks who were too stupid or too selfish or too rebellious to hear and understand the gospel, as we did. So it's very easy to project that kind of judgment onto this statement from Jesus, a dismissal of those, well, they hear but they don't understand, those fools. But Jesus isn't doing that. That's my game, not his. Jesus isn't dismissing or demeaning the crowd here at all. They have come. They've come to listen. They are trying to hear, trying to learn this for themselves. And Jesus is accepting that. He's taking that at face value and meeting them there. He is outside the house trying to close the gap. They want to see and hear, but there's something getting in the way. What Isaiah prophesied has become completely true for them. You will hear, to be sure, but never understand, and you will certainly see, but never recognize what you're seeing. For this people's senses have become calloused. They've become hard of hearing. They've shut their eyes so that they won't see with their eyes or hear with their ears or understand with their minds and change their hearts and lives that I may heal them. Somehow, they're not ready, not able to accept what Jesus is inviting them into. And again, I don't think this is condemnation. This is just a description. Life builds calluses. As we go about our days, we become hard of hearing. We close our eyes to some things. You can't lead someone to a place that they're not prepared to go. That isn't failure. That's just how human beings operate, present company included. So Jesus says to the ones in the boat, "Oh, blessed are your eyes because they see. Blessed are your ears because they hear. I assure you that many others, prophets and righteous people, wanted to see what you see and hear what you hear, but they didn't." Again, there's no judgment. Being able to see and hear, that is blessing. That is gift. You're not in the boat because you've earned it. It is something that's given to you. Plenty of good people, even the prophets, they wanted to be where you are. They never made it there. You're not better than the prophets. You're at a different place in the story. You have received a different gift. So he's painting a picture of grace, of giftedness, of blessing. From that perspective of grace, Jesus then invites the insiders to take another look at the parable of the farmer. Whenever people hear the word about the kingdom and don't understand it, the evil one comes and carries off what was planted in their hearts. This is the seed that was sown on the path. There's no failure in that. These hypothetical people, they listen, but they don't understand. We don't condemn a grade 3 student for not grasping the fundamentals of high school algebra. And we don't condemn a 40-something-year-old preacher for having forgotten everything that they've learned about high school algebra either. We are not prepared to receive all knowledge all the time. Some things bounce off. Many things get carried away. That's where we are. That's who we are. That's okay. The dirt of a path is different from the dirt of a field. The path serves a different purpose entirely. It's not failure for a sidewalk to not produce a rich harvest. It's a path. As for the seed that was spread on rocky ground, this refers to people who hear the word and immediately receive it joyfully. Because they have no roots, they last only for a little while. When they experience distress or abuse because of the word, they immediately fall away. At first glance, again, I bring my judgment to this. What a failure to walk away from faith, to have the thing, to experience the joy, and then to let it die. I mean, you got to be tough, you got to be strong. Faith is hardy and hardworking. But that's like blaming the seed for growing where it was planted, for not growing where it was planted. It's not the seed's fault for landing among the rocks. How can it be blamed for not putting down roots? It's in the rocks. There's nowhere for the roots to go. What if this is about capacity? Some people, perhaps all of us, in certain seasons of life, just can't get there, can't go deeper spiritually. Distress or abuse, as they are named here, those are not small things. It's very difficult for some people to trust, for some people to participate in a faith community, to build the capacity for deep spirituality. Sometimes in this life, people land among the rocks. Sometimes people spend their whole lives there, through no fault of their own. As for the seed that was spread among thorny plants, this refers to those who hear the word, but the worries of this life and the false appeal of wealth choke the word, and it bears no fruit. Yet again, we religious insiders can look down on those who get caught up in the worries and the wealth of this world. But let's not kid ourselves. This is us as well. Who doesn't do this? Maybe not wealth directly, for us more with less Mennonites. But yeah, we're wealthy. Yeah, the pursuit of security and comfort, those are our goals, our pursuits as well. And the worries of this life, yeah, life is hard. There are a ton of weeds and thorns that demand our attention and choke the life out of us spiritually. Not all of us are forced to live among those weeds all the time, but most of us visit there from time to time. And Jesus concludes, as for what was planted on good soil, this refers to those who hear and understand and bear fruit and produce. In one case, a yield of 100 to 1, in another case, a yield of 60 to 1, and in another case, a yield of 30 to 1. Finally, the good people, the moral and productive, who have successfully avoided the hard path and the rocks and the weeds. Well done, people in the boat, faithful disciples. Except there are no good deeds to applaud here. The seed landed where it landed. This time it happened to land at a place in the ecosystem that had all the right conditions, the right elements for growth. The seeds didn't choose their landing site. They did not cultivate or fertilize themselves. They just did what seeds do. They just were. And even within this positive environment, you've got different seeds producing differently. Some bring a yield of 100 to 1, others bring a yield of 60 to 1, and some only 30 to 1. Were the lower producers bad seeds for not optimizing their outputs? Or is this diversity a feature and not a bug? It seems that the farmer is happy with the harvest as a whole, regardless of the statistics, regardless of the failures and the wastes at the individual levels. When I read this story, my inclination is to attach a final moral to the story. Be good soil. Don't be hard or shallow. Stay out of the weeds. Produce good fruit. There is some truth to that. Those seem like Christ-like values for sure. But Jesus doesn't actually say any of that. He doesn't give a moral to the story. He just explains these are who the characters are. This story seems descriptive, not prescriptive. He doesn't tell the crowd or the disciples to do anything with it. Just hear it. If you have ears to hear it, hear what you can, consider it. Remember, the farmer in the story does not seem troubled by any of this. They are just out there scattering seeds without discretion. This was an advanced agricultural society that Jesus was talking to. They knew how to produce crops. They knew how to cultivate the land, to plant seeds and pull weeds and carefully tend their gardens and orchards and vineyards. They knew how to create good soil, if good soil was the goal. But this farmer doesn't till the soil or pull the weeds. They aren't even careful in their planting. They're just walking along, throwing things out there. They don't seem to mind if some goes to feed the birds. They don't mind if some dries out on the rocks. They get the harvest in the end. They get a yield of 30 or 60 or 100 to 1. And apparently, to the only one to whom it matters, that is good enough. This doesn't seem to be a parable about effort or morality or discretion at all. Again, this might be me projecting my own story here, but I suspect the disciples were very much aware that they were inside the boat. They were close to Jesus, and those people on the shore, well, they can only hope to be where we are. I suspect that Jesus could feel the disciples comparing themselves, the righteous insiders, to the ignorant, unwashed masses. And with the parable, Jesus is inviting the disciples to look out on the crowd with compassion and empathy, curiosity, rather than judgment or contempt. It's not some moral failure that has them over there and not over here. You grow where you're planted. They are where they are in this journey. Where else can we expect them to be? Rather than judging and comparing, let's be glad that they've come this far, with eyes and ears and hearts as open as they are able to be. Rather than looking down on them, let's ask, how did they get here? What do they need next? How can we be part of that growth? The good news of the story of God is that God is scattering seeds everywhere, all the time, speaking to people wherever they are, in whatever way that they are able to receive. Sometimes the message gets through, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we're unable to do anything with it, even when we do get it. And sometimes there are exactly the right conditions for growth. And even then, sometimes that growth is massive, 100 to 1. Other times it's half that, 60 or even 30. And again, it seems that the farmer is okay with that, expects that, and counts that as a win. So this isn't a story of judgment or optimization. This isn't a call to be good soil. This is a story of grace. Whatever soil you happen to find yourself in, God is present. And whatever type of soil they happen to be in, well, maybe, just maybe, God is planting seeds over there as well. And even more likely, given the agricultural setting, this is a seasonal thing. I can find myself in all of those images. I've spent a whole lot of time in the weeds this summer doing practical stuff of family life in Saskatchewan. And I can feel guilty about that. I can look down on myself for that, make yet another pledge. Well, someday I'm going to pick out all these weeds and then I'm going to have the discipline to grow and be a good, productive follower of Jesus. Or I can recognize, well, I've made that pledge 1,000 times and I'm still where I am. This is what it is. This is a season, and there is goodness, even among the weeds. It's been a good summer, even if I didn't grow spiritually in the way that I wanted. Seasons come and go, beyond our control. Growth happens, whether we will it or not. How does that happen? That is the mystery. We don't know how things can grow. We can't force it to happen. At least I can't. Maybe Tom can in his lab somewhere. This whole thing is an ecosystem of grace. Jesus told another parable to the disciples in the boat and to the crowd on the shore that day. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast, which a woman took and hid in a bushel of wheat flour until the yeast had worked its way through all the dough. I'm not going to explain that one, give my opinion today. Just going to leave that there for you this morning, in the confidence that the Spirit is present and rising within you as well, wherever you are today.